Results are out for Iran's Friday elections, and results have put quite a different face or faces to parliament. Tables have swung round in favor of Principlists or conservatives. As for the Assembly of Experts, that's a pretty uniform clerical body, so it's just replaced people rather than political parties. Elections determine the future, no matter how low the voter turnout. Iran has been vigilant with holding elections and has held 37 rounds since its 1979 revolution. Those have been all for presidential, parliamentary, experts assembly and local council elections. But today we are talking of the most recent electoral experience. That was on the 21st of February. What of its execution, turnout and results? Stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today for answers. Voter turnout was just over 42.5%. That's about 24.5 million of some 59 million eligible voters of Iran's 83 million strong population. It's the first time there's been less than 50% participation since the revolution, but given circumstances, it's still a considerable number. There is dissatisfaction with the economic situation. The petrol price protests of November are still fresh in memory. Other causes for a lower turnout, the leader and interior minister pointed to.
ما در شرایطی که این انتخابات رو برگزار کردیم حوادث مختلفی
We held this latest election under circumstances where various incidents transpired in our country. We experienced unfavorable climate conditions. We had to deal with the outbreak of coronavirus. Add to this political incidents including the Ukrainian plane crash, the November 2019 protests and subsequent protests of January 2020. Anyway, the country was dominated by specific conditions. Against the backdrop of such conditions, we believe that the voter turnout was acceptable in the legislative elections. It shows that our people are well prepared for participation in state affairs under any conditions.
Those that did vote gave us their reasons for coming to the polls. That was at Hosseiniye Ershad, one of the most popular polling stations in Tehran, where you see a lot of foreign press too.
We feel obliged to safeguard our Islamic nation and the Islamic Republic of Iran. As instructed by the leader, we feel devoted to a growing Iran filled with joy. We have voted for the sake of the leader, for the sake of General Qasem Soleimani, for the sake of the blood of our martyrs, for the sake of our national security. All of us are responsible for electing MPs in order to have a powerful parliament.
To be honest, I've come only for the sake of the leader. The US must keep in mind that it can never do anything.
I'm personally voting for my national zeal, for my homeland. I love my homeland. I've been voting for 41 years now, despite all problems that have existed so far and may exist. At least we have to safeguard our nation.
Every Iranian wants to have a role in determining their nation's fate. I'm a drop in the ocean you're seeing today. I've come to cast my vote so that the competent MPs would be elected.
We have to take part in the elections if we want change.
Voting means stability of the establishment, the empowerment of the establishment.
For the sake of my country and the security that the establishment has brought for us, I'm here to participate in elections. People's participation guarantees the security of any nation.
I've come to vote for the future of myself, my child, my country, my life, my nation.
At a single glance, the lower turnout might be attributed to the nation falling apart from the governing system. But the nations having poured out in protest to the New Year assassination of General Soleimani is a sign Iranians aren't exactly ready to sway in the direction of the US. I got to talk to some MPs regarding the parliamentary elections and experts' assembly elections.
من همیشه معتقد بودم امروزم معتقدم که اولا جمهوری اسلامی
I've always said, and I'm saying again, that first and foremost, the Islamic Republic of Iran is a democratic state in the West Asian region, whose organs are elected through popular vote. We are one of the democratic states in the region, if not the only one. The government, the parliament, the leader, the local councils are elected by people directly or indirectly. Second, we organize one of the cleanest voting processes in our country. We have real elections, but the issue of voter turnout, based on prevailing circumstances, is a separate question. However, the election is real. People go to ballot boxes and vote for their candidates.
Here's how elections change the fate of political parties, or currents as they are called here. While 40 independents were elected to the 11th Parliament, as few as 19 reformists and moderates got in, and as many as 220 Principlists. Now here's what the last round, the 10th Parliament, looked like. Independents were a fraction of the number of either of the two major parties. There were 31 of them, 137 reformists and moderates, and 122 Principlists.
In fact, the reformists and moderates' support for the administration did not leave them any room for maneuvering the elections. People consider the current administration a product of reformists and moderates. Since the sitting administration failed to resolve their problems, the voters laid the blame for this administration's failure on those who supported the administration. That is why they did not win.
البته کارگزاران و مسئولین نظام اونها هم باید
Of course, Iranian officials and executives should keep in mind that participation in the elections would not necessarily mean endorsement of the performance of the government, the parliament, or other bodies. That indicates all-out support for the entire establishment. These two issues must be separated. People would have a variety of demands, with economic recovery being the most important one. At stake are production, unemployment, and income.
Of the 290 seats to fill up, Tehran, the capital, has 30. All 30 have been taken by the Principlist coalition led by former Tehran mayor and two-time presidential hopeful Ghalibaf. He won with over 1,265,000 votes and was followed by Mir Salim with about 892,500 votes. Mir Salim was also a presidential hopeful in past, in 2017. It is now to be seen whether Ghalibaf will take over as House Speaker from three-time Speaker Larijani.
Members of the next parliament, in selecting the future speaker, should try and choose from veteran parliamentarians because they have served in various rounds of parliament and they know every mechanism. It's not easy to run the parliament.
Of 248 MPs registering for candidacy, only 173 were approved, 56 of whom were re-elected to the 290-seat parliament or Islamic Consultative Assembly. Altogether, some 14,500 applied, of which only 7,150 were allowed to run, with reformists and moderates at a minimum. 5 seats out of all, it is noteworthy, are reserved for religious minorities, that is Christians, Jews and Zoroastrians. Regarding disqualified MPs, they can return to the fold in the next round of elections, since the Guardian Council vets the candidates separately for each election, regardless of its past decisions.
شورای نگهبان نگاه سیاسی نداره به افراد.
The Guardian Council does not hold any politicized view of people. Naturally, we are not a political club or party. Instead, we are a legal and oversight body required by law to examine the consistency of candidates' qualifications with legal requirements. It would make no difference to us. I have said everywhere that the Guardian Council would close its eyes in dealing with political factions. The only yardstick is evidence provided in candidates' file as well as regulations. The Guardian Council's performance could be seen in the run-up to the previous legislative and presidential elections. All of them prove that the Guardian Council did not hold any politically motivated view. Naturally, none of our members are affiliated with any political faction or party, nor do they take into account political conditions in the vetting of candidates.
MPs have three major tasks: legislating, supervising the implementation of laws, and representing people. It means that if I'm elected, I should keep officials informed of people's demands and follow up on them. For instance, I should tell the Minister of Health that the hospitals in my constituency are short of nurses. But unfortunately, MPs do not fulfill their obligations in these three sectors. Unfortunately, the issues of legislation and supervision
Not to forget the Experts' Assembly, although theirs were midterm elections to fill in vacant seats, say of the late Ayatollah Rafsanjani. Members were voted in for 5 provinces: Tehran, Qom, Fars, North Khorasan and Razavi Khorasan. For Tehran, it was the Reverends Mesbahi Muqaddam, Akhtari and Momenpur that got in. The Assembly has over 80 members. That's roughly 1 member for every 1 million of Iran's population.
Regarding the main challenges of the next Assembly of Experts, I should say that the US and its allies are hoping that after the demise of the current leader, a new person will occupy this position who is lenient towards the essence of the world arrogance. There is no doubt that the members of the Assembly of Experts, given the expertise they have, will make decisions based on principles such as rationality, spirituality, justice, and resistance. It's a challenge for them.
The experts are elected to monitor the leader's capacity to continue with his duties. They can even designate and dismiss a leader. The current leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, seemed pleased about the elections taking place.
شما میدونید که علیه شرکت مردم در انتخابات چه حجمی کار شد. در فضای مجازی، در دستگاه‌های گوناگون، از هر عاملی که توانستن استفاده کردن. نه حالا در این چند روز اخیر، از 1 ماه پیش، از 2 ماه پیش، اینکه انتخابات نیست، اینی که انتخاب واقعی نیست، اینی که شورای نگهبان چنین کرده و از این قبیل حرفا. هرچی نزدیکتر شدیم این حجم بیشتر شد. حالا آخری هم که این بهانه‌ای پیدا کردن که این بیماری کذایی، این هم که دیگه شد یه بهانه خوبی. شب پنجشنبه که جمعهش انتخابات بود، خبر این بروز این ویروس و این بیماری در مثلا فلان شهر در قم مثلا داده شد شب پنجشنبه. سحر پنجشنبه شروع کرد تبلیغات کردن که مردم نبادا برین تو صف انتخابات وایسین، تو صف رأی دادن وایسین. اونجا چنین هست، چنان هست، بیماری هست، مرض هست، ویروس هست. ببینید، یعنی از کمترین فرصتی استفاده کردن، نگذاشتن حتی چند ساعت هدر بره.
The leader was referring to unfriendly states and their press. Hostile or friendly? Let's see what the world media are saying of Iran's elections. For that, I give you Shahrzad.
Hi, I'm Shahrzad Manucheri, and this is the news section of Iran Today. We'll be looking online for the latest update on Iran's 2020 election and Iranians' apparent favor for Principlists this time around. In an article by CNBC, we notice Iranians frustrated by the lack of political and economic progress. Many see Iran's conservatives winning the Friday, February 21st elections, but that's more to do with reformists losing favor than hardliners gaining popularity, a research associate said this week. Reformists and moderates' performance has been lackluster. The economy hasn't improved, and Iranians are a bit frustrated about the lack of progress on economic and political issues, he told CNBC. No matter who, politically, is at the helm of the government or is crafting economic policy, there are real limits to the solutions they can come up with in the face of unprecedented U.S. sanctions. Al-Manar News reports U.S. sanctions over Iranian elections show Washington's maximum pressure policy is failing. Washington announced new sanctions against 5 members of the Guardians Council of Iran, including Ayatollah Jannati, on February 20th. According to Abbas Mousavi, the spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the restrictive measures by Washington are insane. He called on the United States to abandon the language of sanctions in relation to Tehran. Those who have imposed sanctions, economic terrorism, and maximum pressure on more than 83 million Iranians have not succeeded in their actions. He added, saying they are now desperately targeting the electoral body in Iran, and this shows how much they fear democracy and popular participation in Iran. The Iranian claims Iran says the U.S. must fix its own non-transparent and undemocratic elections before lecturing others. The Iranian Foreign Ministry urged U.S. officials to focus on fixing their own country's non-transparent and undemocratic system before calling into question the legitimacy of elections in other nations. Abbas Mousavi, spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry, told reporters that the U.S. system ignores the vote of the majority of people and said American officials had better address questions about the country's elections from the U.S. public. Mousavi's remarks came in response to a video released earlier by the U.S. State Department, characterizing Iran's February 21st parliamentary elections as fraudulent. That's all for this segment. We'll see you next week.
Talking of the coronavirus, electronic voting would have been an option to both vote and keep away from crowds. But that would have been beforehand, and it's not widely established yet. Hopes were that in 140 cities, voting would be conducted electronically. Much of the work for holding electronic elections is related to the authentication process. President Rouhani has said that in collaboration with the Interior Ministry and Guardian Council in the year 1400 or 2021, presidential elections will majorly be conducted electronically. Now there's the matter of the finality of a vote and a win. Elections can call for a second round of voting if a candidate doesn't get enough votes. By way of Article 8 of the Elections Law, parliamentary candidates must win at least 20% of the votes. If they don't, the leading 4 candidates in each constituency must compete against one another in the runoff. Anyone with more votes gets to walk the corridors of power. There's no minimum vote defined in this stage. The authenticity of the votes must as ever be determined by the Guardian Council, just as it vetted hopefuls for candidacy before the elections. The runoff to the elections should be scheduled for 17th April. 11 constituencies of 208 must partake to win their seats.
I believe that the issue of election laws and amendments to it must be taken seriously. Like in the Assembly of Experts, there could be, for instance, some tests so that those who want to run for parliament would have the necessary knowledge for becoming an MP. They must know all bylaws and everything else about representation. That would be aside from knowledge about budgeting, planning and other sectors. After clearing such tests, other personal and professional qualifications would be reviewed. But it's not done and just everyone can run. Those who stand in the election need to have the approval of influential individuals and groups. It means that they should enjoy some sort of support before running in elections.
Iran's Guardian Council is something like France's Constitutional Council, which checks statutes to see whether they conform with the Constitution after they are voted in by Parliament, but before they are made law by the President signing. Since March 1, 2010, private citizens can also check with this council whether the law being applied to their case and trial, if they are on trial, conforms with the Constitution, whether it's constitutional, in other words. While Iran's Guardian Council of the Constitution is the electoral supervisory body, it's the Interior Ministry that's in charge of executing the voting process. The minister said all those with an objection to the participation and voting have 2 days to express their dissatisfaction to the executive boards, which in turn have 7 days to review the pleas and send them to the Guardian Council. The Guardian Council also has 7 days to verify the authenticity of votes and announce the result.
Of course, some of these faults are to blame on the parliament. Look, in instructing the general electoral policies, the leader has called on the parliament to reform the electoral law. The Guardian Council would have only 1 month to review, for example, 10,000 files and decide about them. That is a tough job. Following the instructed general policies, the parliament is required to reform the electoral law so that the Guardian Council would have at least 6 months to study the details of every file.
Once verified by the Guardian Council, election results are official. It is then that MPs can take their oath in the House.
Those who claim to be seeking to revive Iran's economy are required to offer plans. Rarely have I heard them say they have any plan for economic issues, for instance, controlling sources of hard currency or customs issues. Only few of them had well thought out plans. They were just expressing mere slogans. We should do this and that. So what?
That's plenty on reformist versus principlist. But what of their followers? I asked voters what importance they placed on Parliament. In other words, what expectations they had of Parliament.
As the late Imam said, the Parliament is at the top of all affairs in the country. The Parliament sets guidelines for future presidential elections, safeguarding the Islamic establishment, planning all treaties, agreements and laws come from the Parliament, which is also tasked with supervising the implementation of the law. The Parliament should allay fears, show sympathy for people, particularly for the youth. MPs should not give empty promises and they should make good on their pledges. The legislative election is much more important than the presidential election because very important decisions are made in the parliament for our country's reconstruction.
We hope that with their presence at the head of the legislative body, we would see prosperity and development in all sectors.
The parliament is instrumental in legislation. It has to block loopholes and draw up laws which would facilitate economic affairs.
The parliament is of great help. It's a decision-making body. It deals with people's issues. Each city is represented by 1 or more MPs. The problems of those cities are discussed in the parliament.
In the Western democratic psyche, religion and democracy don't quite mix. But whatever and however the selection and arrangement of candidates in Iran, in this country people do vote for all candidates, be they presidential, parliamentary, expert, clerical or local. In modern terms, that is something in contrast to regional countries at large, say Saudi Arabia, which is of course an absolute monarchy. The king is also head of government and members of parliament or the Saudi Consultative Assembly are appointed by royal decree. The only popular election in the country is municipal, and that excluded women until 2015. The United Arab Emirates is a milder case in point. The UAE is also a monarchy with Abu Dhabi's ruler as president and head of state and Dubai's ruler as prime minister. Anyhow, it's back to Iran. Soon, in late spring, the new entrants will be taking their seats in their assemblies, experts or consultative. The latter, that's MPs, will be taking their oath on their sacred books to safeguard Islam and the Islamic Revolution, the country's sovereignty and the rights of the people, as well as the Constitution. That's their story about to begin and ours here ending. Now things are down to how the new parliament will be overseeing the running of the country. There should be hard days in stock for reformist President Rouhani, given parliament has been dominated by principlists. There's lots more on the matter, so do return to the box in future days and weeks. And don't forget to leave your comments. Bye for now.